Hey Clone Club, welcome to One Shot Cophine's official debut review. This episode was originally intended to be a webcast, but for various reasons I am now doing it as a podcast for today. Whether or not the next one will be a webcast is still entirely up in the air. But anyway, so before we really kick things off, a little background info. If you didn't already know, One Shot Cophine is intended to be a Cophine fanfiction review blog where I'll be talking about specific fics that I've fallen in love with in the past year or so, since I first joined the OB fandom. I've never been much of a blogger before, and the whole realm of webcasting, podcasting is new to me entirely. So this is all going to be really experimental, and honestly, it's just for fun anyway, so don't expect things to get too serious. Briefly, a few things about me. Call me Kylan. You can find me here at One Shot Cophine or on my personal blog under the username Kyantea. I also just started writing on AO3 as Caden Vane if you're interested, though I don't intend to discuss my own work here. I'm 22, raging homosexual, and avid fanfiction enthusiast, obviously. My ships are Xena and Gabrielle, Vossman, and of course Cophine. I'm also a nursing student, graduating in December. Finally, yay. That's really all you need to know, I suppose. Though if there's anything else you want to know, feel free to hit up my Ask box because I get hella bored. Anyway, another thing I'll be doing through this blog is hosting intermittent fanfiction competitions, the first of which just ended Monday night. It closed with 6 wonderful entries. In the spirit of fairness, after the contest closed, I pulled the entries and reviewed them all at once without knowing who wrote what. I figured that'd be the fairest way to do it. So, without knowing whose was whose, I made the winning selections and ranked them accordingly. The theme for the First Annual Fanfic competition was a prompt asking the entrants to tell a story centering on the idea of lost time in no more than 2,500 words. The prompt itself was pretty liberal. I think the real challenge was probably writing a story with such a small word count. It was interesting to see the different ways everyone interpreted the prompt, however. Each story had a really unique take on it, and I was really impressed by that. But anyway, before we get into tonight's featured review of 032421 by jaybear1701, as promised, I have the results of the contest. And if I pronounce your names hella weird, because I'm just going to say them how I always say them, I'm from the deep dark south of the USA, so please forgive me. But without further ado, the winners of the 2016 One Shot Cophine First Annual Fanfiction Competition are: first place, Your Loving Jack by Trilon and Perisphere; second place, Promethean Thieves by Yes Both Ways; and third place, I Have Been Waiting by Cophine Levin. The Best Newcomer Award, aka First Place for the New Guys, goes to 3 Years Since by Cophine Lives. And the remaining 2 entries are most definitely honorable mentions, and they were just as wonderful, but damn it, I had to pick winners. So we have Dedication by Hermione Spencer and Closing Night by Million Magic. As part of winning, I will be reviewing each of the 4 winning fics. I said I would do that in this podcast, but I think what I'm going to do is separate them into their own individual reviews and post them alongside the links to the story, as well as Patreon account links if the authors have one. I will be posting links to all 6 of the stories with this podcast, so I encourage all of you to check them out, especially if you're going to listen to me ramble on about them. Read them first, that way I don't ruin it for you. But again, thank you so much to everyone who participated. I loved your stories. You had so few words to work with, but you still managed to do so much, and if you didn't win, please don't be discouraged. I read more than just your entries. I know your work, and you were both phenomenal. So write on, and anything you want me to read, anything you want me to review, anyone, send it my way, and I will totally look into it. Alright, switching gears, we're going to move on to the part that I am most horrified about. And we're going to go into our first official review. The story is 032421 by jaybear1701. And the reason that I picked this fic for the initial review was because it was actually the first Cophine AU I ever read. And that is especially important for a particular reason. I tend to do this thing where when I first go into a fandom, when I finally break down and start reading the fanfiction for it, I will only read canon fic. I don't really know why, but I get this fic snob attitude where I'm like, oh, no one wants to read AU fics for this. No, those are stupid. Who would want to read about them in that situation? and I run out of canon fic to read and finally break down and end up reading an AU, and I put my foot in my mouth every single time because I get blown away, and then I'm just like devouring AU fic like it's no man's business. I can't get enough of it. And so of course my bridge into the Cophine AU world was 032421, and as expected, it blew my mind. Another reason that I remember this fic so strongly is because it actually impacted me in the real world in quite a significant way. As I mentioned earlier, I am a nursing student, and I read this fic, I guess it was the end of January. We were just starting a new semester, and it's our specialty semester, third semester, and we have 3 separate rotations. We have to do a pediatrics rotation, an obstetrics rotation, and a psychiatric rotation, and I was on peds. Anyway, the point was I was horrified, absolutely terrified, going into this children's hospital and working with little kids, and I read the fic right at the beginning of the rotation. I think we had one clinical day, and when we came back for the second one, I had read it. There's this scene, the day repeats in this fic. So there's the scene where Casima's going into the cafeteria, every day. And for some reason, just that one scene stuck with me. And every day that we went into the cafeteria, I was just waiting for Delphine to show up. And let me tell you, feeling like you are Cosima Nihas waiting for Delphine Cormier to just appear next to you in the lunch line is pretty damn great. But it was quite a stress relief. And just something about the way dyad is presented in this fic just really reminded me of being in a hospital. And so the whole time, it was just like every day was so surreal walking down the halls. Like I guess it gave it a bit of magic, and it really helped transition me into this semester. So thank you, Jaybear, thank you, fanfiction, for that. But anyway, my little drabble aside, a little bit about the author, jaybear1701, part of the OB Frankenfix group. If you have not heard of the OB Frankenfix group, I don't know how you ended up here, but you need to stop and go read everything, and then maybe come back. Jaybear writes for Orphan Black. They have fics for The Legend of Korra, The 100, Star Trek, and most recently have disembarked on the Wayhot ship, but they still write for OB, so it's all good. There are a lot of noteworthy fics by this author that I will definitely be getting into in future episodes if this continues, because I forgot you wrote A Beautiful Surrender. Like, I remember the story, I think about it all the time, but I forgot you wrote it. And we are definitely going to do an episode on that because it is phenomenal. Please go read it. As well as After Everything and Love for One Song. I'm still begging you to write a part 3 for that. You cannot end it with a key card in her back pocket and not tell what happens after. I'm just saying. Anyway. So, 032421, it is a Groundhog Day fic in which the day keeps repeating. It was based off a movie, 1201, I believe. I've never watched it, never heard of it, but Groundhog Day, same premise. So, essentially, what's happening in a time loop story with this fic specifically is the day keeps repeating, and no one is aware of it except for Cosima, and she's only aware of it because she was electrocuted at precisely the right moment when the time loop began. So it's up to her to figure out what's causing the time bounce and how to prevent it so that she can get time moving forward again. Fortunately for Cosima, the time bounce theory is already prevalent within the world of the fic, so she already has a hunch as to what happened, and that, of course, was the firing of the super accelerator project that was supposed to have been shut down by the government, but the physicists department didn't want to waste their efforts, and so we have Delphine, Leakey, Ethan Duncan, and Henrik Johansson, the 4 physicists that worked on this project, sneaking around to try and fire it successfully before it's completely dismantled. Of course, the settings were off and whatnot, and the firing was unsuccessful, ultimately throwing the world into a time bounce, in which they will continue to fire it every day and perpetuate this problem. I just want to go ahead and note that I think perhaps the most important part of a time loop story is the very first day, because it sets the foundation for every single day that's yet to repeat. So you really have to pay attention to the details, and I love the way that Jaybear really throws in those tiny things that seem kind of insignificant, or they're so small, but they can lead to something so much bigger, like specifically the coffee stain on Scott's lab coat. It just seemed like something characteristic of Scott, but we come to find out towards the very end of the story that he actually did speak to Delphine before any of the group, and he got his coffee stain not by clumsiness alone, but by being chivalrous to Dyad's Golden Girl, which I suppose it doesn't play a huge role, that example, but for me it's just something that I really loved. And then, of course, there are other things like the brief mention of Cal's involvement with Darknet that leads Cosima to find out that he is a hacker, which plays a huge role in the rest of the story. Cosima's screwed up stem cell line, if it hadn't been for having to replate it, she may have never initially spoke with Delphine in the lunch line to begin with because she was late. You know, all these little things that really set the stage for what's to come. And you would think that with the repeating events that the story would be easier to put together because you play with the same pieces, but it really adds a new layer of complexity that Jaybear just does so well with, in that you have to remember what happens when, and so if Cosima does this, how is it going to affect that? If she arrives on time for class because she misses the traffic jam, what's going on at Dyad when she gets there because, you know, the lab will be empty, no one's there yet, or, you know, if she stops Delphine in the hall at this point, what is that going to prevent, or how is that going to stall later events? Things of that nature. But anyway, on the subject of Delphine, going into the story, we see the first few chapters really detailing what happens on the first day. And we get to see Cosima and Delphine's first initial meeting, or their first interaction, I should say. And that very quickly progresses into the promise of a date, which ultimately ends in Delphine's murder. And I do argue that this story would have been a fantastic murder mystery if you didn't go into it knowing that it was a time bounce. AU. But anyway, and so when Cosima wakes up and realizes the day has repeated, her initial mission isn't to stop the time bounce. It's, I have to save Delphine. And so she's breaking her neck trying to figure out how to save Delphine. And of course, the first 2 days she's completely unsuccessful, but she succeeds on the third day, only to have Henrik Johansson die, who she originally thought was behind Delphine's murder to begin with, thanks to Cal and his Darknet expertise. And so, first few days, she's trying to get close to Delphine. She's trying to convince her, we're in a time bounce, you know, you're gonna die, you know, I need you to believe me, we've gotta stop the super accelerator from being fired. All of this without knowing that Delphine is in on the plan to fire the super accelerator, which we come to find out on, I think it's like the third day. But we also come to find out that even though Delphine has been lying, she genuinely cares for Cosima and has this pull towards her, and ultimately it ends in some very beautifully written smut. And it's so bittersweet because Cosima is falling head over heels, just deeper and deeper in love with Delphine every day, finding out more and more about her, and every morning she wakes up and Delphine doesn't remember her. And I think that was a very, talk about redefining a slow burn. And this is important because later on when Delphine gets her memories back, she's suddenly appearing in Cosima's doorway, completely aware of these weeks that they've spent together that she didn't previously remember due to the time bounce happening. And so they get to spend a day and just saying to hell with stopping the time bounce, you know, and lots of wonderful smut ensues. It's hard to write good smut, and Jaybear writes wonderful smut. Not totally explicit, but sensual, and I love it. But anyway, so they take a day to themselves and they kind of regroup, and now Cosima she's not alone in this anymore. She has someone there with her to try and help her figure things out. And it helps that Delphine is in on the plan, so she knows more of what they intend to do. She has access to the project, and but anyway, basically, you know, they put their heads together and they figure it out. And Delphine looks at it from the perspective of why stop the firing at all, which of course they ultimately get into an argument about, but she is right. In the end, they allow the firing to happen. And thanks to Delphine having corrected some settings that were causing the misfire to happen, they were able to put an end to the time bounce. The final chapter before the epilogue ended so beautifully because it was such a cliffhanger. Leaky gets taken down by the feds. Ethan had been shot earlier in the chapter. We don't know what happened to him, if he's even lived. Cosima gets shot at the very end. You think she's dying, and then we roll over into the epilogue and she's waking up in bed, her alarm clock's going off, and you think, like, holy shit, it didn't work, they're still in the time bounce. And then you find out Delphine is in bed with her. It makes reference to the scar from her gunshot wound, and then, well, in come running in their 5-year-old children. So it's 5 years later to the day, and it's just a happy ending. But it ended with so much angst going into the last chapter, so everything just tied together beautifully. happy ending for Cophine, married Cophine, Cophine with kids. It ended on such a fulfilling note, and it was just wonderful. Alright, with my shoddy Cliff Notes version of the story out of the way, I do just want to go ahead and say that things I really, really loved about the writing of this story: characterization, on point as fuck. Casima's mannerisms, the way she spoke, it's like the way she approached Delphine, always trying to appeal to the logic, was very true to Casima. The character interactions themselves were wonderfully genuine. It's a really tricky concept, I think, to have to explain to someone over and over again, oh, by the way, everything you know about reality is a lie. And I feel like the way the characters handled it on the day, given the context in which Casima brought it to them, was very, very authentic. You know, sometimes Delphine wanted to believe, but there was always the skepticism. Sometimes she was just outright offended. Using people's secrets to convince them was a brilliant idea and gave us some interesting tidbits into other characters' backgrounds, like Sarah and Cold Bitch Digest Rachel. And in addition to just the characterization, the emotional aspect of the story was very strong. The humor was well done. Personally, for me, I feel like it's very hard to write conflict also, but again, it was authentically done without feeling like it kind of played into some sort of trope, for lack of a better word. And then on the subject of tropes, Cophine Fix, we always tend to pay homage to the different scenes within the show. I love that Jaybear took a lot of those scenes and reversed them to where Casima seemed to play Delphine's role and vice versa. For example, you know, in the show we have their confrontation in season 1 where Casima busts Delphine for lying and Delphine turns around and says, you know, you can trust me. But now we have it the other way where Casima's trying to convince Delphine that she's to be trusted in this whole crazy mess. But I liked the new twist and seeing it from the other side, I guess you could say. Alright, so I think I'm just gonna go ahead and finish this up, but I want to end with one of my favorite quotes from the story, as well as just telling you my favorite moment. My favorite moment was when Casima wakes up after having been shot the first time. Delphine appears in the apartment. Like, it was so unexpected, and it was just kind of like that finally moment that you always wait for when you read a Cophine fic, and you're just like waiting and waiting and waiting for them to get together, and they finally do. So definitely, hands down, my favorite moment, other than the epilogue, because that was a badass ending. But and then my favorite quote probably would have to be from chapter 1, and it's when Casima's in the lab and she's thinking about Neelan, and it says, "It always felt 10 degrees too cold in the lab, which the warmth-loving Casima particularly despised. Fitting for Neelan, though, she mentally noted Dante did write that the center of hell was encased in ice." And that cracks me up every time. But I think we're gonna end on that note. One last thing before we go, I have been asking for submissions and shout-outs to Jaybear for the story. I did receive one from Tumblr user LoveBites22. I was going to screenshot it, but I accidentally deleted it when trying to reply because I'm the biggest Tumblr noob that there is. But she did write that 032421 was one of her all-time favorite fics, and that she thoroughly enjoyed it. So thank you for submitting, and sorry again for deleting it. And we didn't have any fan art submissions, but I did doodle something just for kicks. I doodled Casima's alarm clock and a lamp that, I know she was shocked by Sarah's lamp in the living room, and Sarah would never have a double helix lamp, but it looked kind of cool, so my small contribution. We have reached the end of my first ever train wreck of a podcast. Thank you so much to anyone who's still listening, and thank you again to jaybear1701 for your amazing contributions to the Cophine fanfic world, and I hope you continue writing, and I hope everyone goes and reads your work because it's phenomenal. I don't know when the next podcast will be up. I haven't quite decided how brave I'm feeling yet, but it will more than likely be over The Swan and the Dove by Trylon and Perisphere, which is a World War II AU, and it is amazing. So if you've not read that yet, I'm going to link it, so go read it. But again, just thank you so much, everybody.